All right, welcome to today's session. I am going to share our intro slides here. This is Morgan from MPUG, getting us started today. We're excited to be on Zoom. So this session is called Project Management Evolution, How Software-Defined Products and AI are Changing the Way We Think About Project Lifecycle. And we have Ludo Hadouk with us. I hope I said your last name right. I think I remembered it. Okay, I'll let you introduce yourself officially when we get started in a moment. I want to remind us up top, this is our September sale time. So as current MPUG members, you have access to these live events every week. So I know you're already members, but as a reminder, you can renew your membership for a whole additional year for just $99 during our September sale month right now. The coupon code's on your screen. And we would love to have you sign on at this price because this is the last time you will see $99 for an annual membership. So make sure you take advantage of that. And that is just about all I need to tell you today. I'm going to stop my share. I want to mention that we do have an interactive chat today. So you are welcome to speak in the chat. Let us know where you're coming in from. Say hello. This is a really exciting new feature that we don't typically have on GoToWebinar. So feel free to ask questions in the chat, share your thoughts, and we will be excited to hear from you today. All right, Ludo, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and take us away.
Well, thank you very much, Morgan. So first of all, I want to check that people can see the screen and the presentation. Can you see that all right?
I can see it. Yeah, if anyone else can just chime in. Yeah.
Perfect.
Looks
It
like we're
is
good.
undoubtedly the most difficult part of the presentation is to get PowerPoint to show right on Zoom. So thank you for confirming that. So first of all, I want to say I'm super excited to be here. I was looking forward to this. I get to talk about the two topics that I have the most passion for: one, project management, and two, AI and technology. So this is something I hope will be valuable to everyone here. I know I'm going to have fun talking about it. And I was talking to Morgan a little bit earlier around how we're going to make that happen and try to hopefully make this not just a one-way discussion or one-way conversation from me to you, but an opportunity to interact and engage. So we'll have a couple moments in this hour to kind of pause and maybe take some questions, some comments, some reactions. So anyways, this is going to be fun. I'm super happy to be here. So I'm going to introduce myself in the next slide, but I just wanted to give everyone a little bit of a high-level view of what we're going to be talking about today. So as I was thinking about how should I present the topic of the evolution of project management, especially in the light of fastly evolving technology, the advances of AI, which seems to revolutionize the space on a practically weekly basis now. When I thought about how to bring these topics together, I really thought about decomposing it into a couple of waves. Number one is it's always interesting and important to kind of take a quick look back and see where do we come from. When we think about the project management discipline, which is now a mature and well-established set of methodologies, where are we kind of coming from, and how is that helping to explain what is happening today, and maybe more importantly, where the discipline and the practice is going in the future. So we're going to spend a few minutes on that. AI has been around for quite some time, but it feels like in the last year or two, it has been exploding in visibility, in relevance, and it seems to be everywhere we look. And so what is the impact of AI in what surrounds us, in the product and services and experiences that we live with? And maybe more interesting to this crowd, how is that starting to already affecting the world of project management? And then we'll kind of bring all that together into a bit of a summary and discussion on these topics. And like I said, I'd love to hear more from the audience and see what your own experience looks like in the context of the topics that we will be covering today. So I'm part of Envorso. My name is Ludo Hodik. I'm the CTO for Envorso. I have a long history with the Microsoft product in particular and project management in general. I started my career at Microsoft in the mid-90s. And I joined the company as a software engineer working on Microsoft project. Back in 1993, when I was an intern, and 1994, when I started as a full-time software engineer, the product was a very different beast than the Microsoft project you might be using today. And I think some of my experience back then will be reflected in how we used to do things from a project management standpoint back in the days. I started my career as a software engineer and kind of moved my way up the ranks in the project team. I ended up spending over a decade in the Microsoft project organization, going from intern to software engineer. At some point, I was running the entire engineering organization as director of engineering, and then finally led the project business unit as general manager for the project and project server business unit, which I did for about 3 or 4 years. And after that, I continued my career at Microsoft and spent a number of additional years in office in a variety of engineering and general management roles, leading teams such as the Excel software engineering team, the Office 365 engineering organization, and a few more. So long career at Microsoft, about 25 years total, about half or a little bit over half of that time spent in Microsoft project. And as I was growing as an engineer and as a professional person in the Microsoft project and the project management world, I saw the discipline and the tool set around project management evolve radically from the early to mid-90s all the way into the mid-2000s. And even though I left project and was no longer connected directly with the project management space after I kind of moved on, I remained very interested in the way project management was continued to evolve as a discipline. And it's fair to say that another decade later, now well into the mid-2020s, the management of projects, products, initiatives, the practice, the tools, the methodologies around this has continued to evolve and is nowhere near stopping. And I think a lot of it is directly correlated to the types of products that get built, but also to the tools and the platforms that are available to project managers and anyone with a stake into the project management discipline. So very interested to, again, hear from you, because I know many of you have seen various versions of what I'm describing, and I'm sure all of you have a very unique experience in the project management space and how it's evolved over the years. And Envorso, after leaving Microsoft about 3-4 years ago, I joined Meta back when the company was still called Facebook. And I joined as VP of engineering for the AI infrastructure team. And that allowed me to move from project management to this new space of AI. At least, it was growing and still fairly nascent 3-4 years ago when I joined the company. And I had a chance to lead the infrastructure organization that was building the internal capabilities that all Meta-based products were building on top of to deliver functionality, AI-powered functionality to their own customers. So as VP of engineering for AI infra, I was building the internal capabilities, the platforms and services that was delivering AI capabilities to teams such as Facebook.com, Instagram, WhatsApp, etc. I did that for a little bit over 2 years and learned a lot about AI, learned a lot about modern project management and engineering practices, and also had a chance to spend a lot of time in what was at the time and continues to be probably one of the best and most capable AI organization in the world. And even though I left Meta now about 1.5 years ago, I've continued following the advancements and what my former team has been able to deliver for the company. And it's nothing short of incredible how the company has been kind of rewriting its internal playbook around AI. And I think some of that will be part of the talk I'm going to have in the next hour. Following Meta, it was time for me to do something different. And I had a chance to join a friend of mine, Adrian Belfour, who created Envorso about 6 years ago. Adrian famously created one of the key Microsoft project partner back when I was a general manager for the team, P-Cubed at the time. That was one of the companies Adrian had founded at the time, and I remained connected with Adrian. It was time for me to finally join him a couple of years ago and join Envorso as chief technical officer, technology officer, to help the company build internal software engineering practices and augment the consulting and services business that Envorso was built around, specifically in the area of enabling traditional and established industry players make the digital turn and embrace technology as part of their product and development initiatives. The purpose of Envorso is to transform today's manufacturers into tomorrow's software leaders, and we do that through technology and increasingly through embracing and embedding AI-driven methodologies within their internal practices. And like I said, a couple of years ago, I joined the company to help accelerate our progress in that area, and in particular, develop not only consulting practices, but also build products and platforms as part of the offering that we provide to our customers. Envorso is also very directly connected with MPUG. MPUG is part of the Envorso organization. So here's a quick view of the type of personality we have as part of Envorso. Adrian, our founder, I mentioned him. Scott, our CEO, has a long history in the automotive and industry and manufacturing business. Jeff and myself have shared experience at Microsoft. We both spent over 2 decades in that company and joined Envorso, bringing a lot of understanding and knowledge around product and software engineering, mostly coming from our Microsoft background and others, such as my background in AI at Meta. All right, so going into the presentation itself, I mentioned that at the beginning. We're going to try and make this a little bit interactive. I am not going to be able to read comments in Zoom as I speak, but Morgan will be monitoring the chat window. And if you feel like you have any comments or questions, feel free to drop that, and we'll have a couple of moments in the next 45 minutes or so to pause and look at the questions and take some of them and make this interactive. I'd love to hear about your role. I'd love to hear about kind of where you're joining us from, but also as you hear and listen to some of what I'm going to be talking about around project management and its evolution, I'd love to also hear about how that's affecting you, how you're living the transformations that's underway, and how you're integrating that into your role and hopefully leveraging technology to make your role even more impactful. All right. So starting with a quick kind of overview of where we come from in terms of the project management practice. You know, the world of product lifecycle, even the word lifecycle, really only has a meaning in recent years. You know, the lifecycle of days past was really more of a linear progression from, you know, scoping to establishing a business case to planning and execution in developing the product, and then validation, testing, and finally a launch. And when I reminisce on my own early days as a software engineer working on Microsoft Project 4.1, which was the first version of the product I had an opportunity to work in, when I reminisce on that, that was very much the type of execution and planning and execution that we were following back in those days. It was, you know, linear, you know, obviously a waterfall-based process. And the product we were envisioning at the beginning of that process and the product that was launched 2, sometimes 3 years later, those two things were quite closely related. We pretty much were operating and executing on an idea that was cast and defined at one point in time, and then releasing the outcome of that idea, the product, a couple of years later. And the description of that product was very similar to what we had envisioned a couple of years earlier. Then we would observe the reaction to the launch, mostly through interactions with customers, verbal and in-person interactions, or chat room, this kind of stuff, and incorporating the feedback so that it would feed into the next process, and the next process would be very similar to this, and rinse and repeat. And I'm sure a lot of that feels very familiar to all of you from when you were operating product and project management back in the days. It might still resonate today. There are still, product development that follow a similar path, and that's fine. There's areas where it still continues to make sense, but for the most part, things have evolved. But just to kind of go back, the goals were, pretty clearly defined, were coordinated across multiple teams, stakeholders, dependencies, etc. It was clear what the budget we were operating within was, and the goal was to ship a product and be done with the process. We were operating with a number of challenges, obviously, in that kind of original way of working. One, there was very little feedback. In fact, almost no feedback beyond the product launch itself. Of course, we had early beta and early customers, but that feedback was very contained, very limited. And in some cases, the audience for that feedback was carefully selected and not necessarily representative to the broad audience that would be experiencing the product once it finally shipped. And then clearly the challenges of making a mistake were pretty great, because by the time the product was launched, it was basically cast in stone. And while obviously we're talking about a software product here, and there were opportunities to release subsequent updates and maybe dot releases on top of that product, those things were very expensive. They were very limited. We wanted to limit them to a very, very select number. And the reason was we were busy working on the next version of the product. So there was very little opportunity for us to react to feedback once the launch had happened, and very little opportunities to tweak what the product ended up looking like. And the culture essentially was a product of the process, right? We had a pretty short-term focus, typically a couple of years. There were spikes in the execution model. We would rush and then pause until the next planning was done, and kind of rinse and repeat. And again, there was very little room for error, and errors were extremely, extremely expensive. Now, there were exceptions to this model. And it was interesting to see that just about a year ago, there was a software update that was released to the Voyager probe. And the software update was in reaction to one of the systems that had finally failed after 46 years. And through that software update, the team at NASA was able to breathe another few decades, probably, of life into that probe, which left in the 70s, if some of you remember that. And it was kind of an interesting exception to what I was describing in the previous slide. It was an exception in that was probably one of the earliest, if not the first example of kind of a software-defined product, if you want to call that. So that process existed, but it was extremely rare. And obviously, in this case, it was done by virtue of the physical disconnection from between the product and the team that created the product. And this is something that's worth noting. Now, obviously, when you look at the next version of such crafts, such as the JW telescope, software updates and software-defined product was at the core of designing that product. And we're now taking these type of examples for granted. I have a smart fridge at home, which in hindsight maybe was not a great idea, but it is what it is. It has a screen and it just gets updates every now and then. And I'm kind of thinking sometimes that, there might be a time when my fridge just stops working because the update didn't work the way it was supposed to. But the point being, we're now surrounded by products we can touch, we can manipulate, that are by definition software defined. They are augmented and modified in their behaviors through software updates. 46 years ago, that was an exception. Today, it is the way we expect products to be. And so when we apply that model to the software engineering process, the definition of done, of being complete, is constantly evolving today and will continue to evolve with AI. And this is something I'm going to talk about a little bit later. The goals now is that the software that gets released, and in some cases, the physical products that get released, are no longer following the same definition of what done typically meant. The goal is that the product is designed to evolve, is designed and expected to have shortcomings, flaws, or in some cases, functionality that are just stubs waiting to be fully enabled through further releases, further updates, constant software evolution. So the challenge is you're now faced with not just a nice to have, but an absolute necessity to have a finger on the pulse of your product once it is released to customers. It's no longer an option to not have visibility like I did not back in my early days working on versions of Microsoft Project. Once the product got released, the only feedback loop I had was through actual humans telling my software engineering team what happened, what went well, what didn't. It's no longer an option to have that kind of disconnected or loosely coupled or high latency feedback loop. It is now a necessity for the way products are designed to have immediate and constant collection of data and immediate feedback loop into how the product is being used, how the product is behaving, issues that might be happening, etc. And as a result, the teams and the software engineering and release processes has to include the analysis of data and include the identification and interpretation of that data into the software engineering process itself. The notion of done has completely changed in the last 10 to 15 years from an event that happened on a finite and well-defined time frame to an ongoing and always changing outcome. There is no longer a definition of done for the majority of the products we experience. It's true for software. It's been true for software for a couple of decades now, and it's increasingly true for physical products that we experience on a daily basis. And as a result, the culture needs to shift. The culture needs to be much more focused on data. The culture of the entire team needs to be constantly focused on constant learning and adapting. And it needs to be focused on that long-term life cycle of the product. The product, again, has now a near indefinite lifetime. And the culture of the teams, the product, the project management, the software engineering teams, the delivery teams around it, that culture has to change. So how does project management, kind of zooming into the project management discipline a little bit here, how does it kind of play out? And how should it adapt and has adapted in this world of never-ending product lifecycle, in a world where, again, done and complete no longer means the same thing? So what we're seeing is, we're actually seeing new roles and maybe more accurately, new responsibilities being inserted or added to the more classic definition of product or project managers. Project managers today are way more technical, way closer to the kind of inner fabric and the inner working of the products they're working on. It's no longer a nice to have. It's absolutely critical to the success of the discipline and the success of the individuals to be much more closely related and operating with the engineering teams, with the delivery teams that they are helping support and that they're part of as part of the development process. There's a need to increase the cross-functional interactions between the product and project management teams and all the teams working on delivering the project. And very critically, project managers are now depending and relying on a whole new crop of tools and software that are themselves adapting, evolving, and delivering new capabilities compared to the type of product and project management software we had when I was a starting software engineer at Microsoft in the mid-90s. The culture is also shifting dramatically in this always on, always evolving world. There's continuous learning and continuous delivery mindset. And that is not just a culture shift. It truly goes to the core of what the mindset is for a product and project manager. The project manager has to have this continuous learning mindset. We never really know today how the product will be received, where the product will be succeeding, and where it will fall short. And it's actually true. It's always been true. We've never kind of known prior to shipping, but now we get to build the kind of resilience and expectation of product evolution into the product design itself. And that's a complete shift of culture. I talked about data, and I'm going to talk about data a little bit more because it's so core to all of this. But one thing that is now critical is data has to be central and built as part of the product itself. In fact, in most product teams today, whether it is a physical product, such as my refrigerator or an EV or any other physical product that you might be interacting with, or whether it is a software product, teams today start with designing the data and the metrics that they will be gathering, reading, relying on before they actually design core functionality in the product, or they build and design them together. Back in the early days where we started having the ability to collect data, data was more of an afterthought. Data was tacked on at the end of the product lifecycle. It was typically done as a added activity to augment the product so that there would be some understanding of product usage in the wild. Today, data is built at the core, and in many cases, in most modern teams, data and the collection of data, the definition of metrics, is designed and put as part of the product lifecycle at the front end of the execution process. And as a result, telemetry and how the product is used by customers is absolutely central to the way teams today operate and central to the culture and the definition of the project manager role. And then finally, what that leads us to is what used to be the end of a process, a product launch, is now really the beginning of the life of a product. The launch event itself is just an interesting data point on a never-ending life cycle. And the process of building the product, the role of project managers and engineers, and the operation of that product has to adapt to this new kind of reality where launching is no longer the end, but very much the beginning of that life cycle. There's a couple of examples, but I think what this slide is aimed at delivering is, in a world where products evolve constantly and where data is central to that life cycle, complexity is the worst enemy. And complexity kills agility, and complexity muddles and adds noise to the ability to understand the product, the ability to understand the customer, and the ability to tweak the right things so that the product remains relevant, remains competitive, remains the kind of product that delights customers. And there's a couple of examples in the EV space, which I think is interesting. I was listening to a talk from Jim Farley a few months back, where he was talking about a typical, and he's the CEO for Ford Motors, he was talking about a typical Ford car. And a typical Ford vehicles has something around 130 to 150 modules that are trying to connect and talk to each other. These modules, some of them, a very small subset, is actually built by Ford. The majority of these modules are built by OEMs, such as Bosch or Visteon and many others. Now, there is some standard in how these modules talk to each other through CAN networks and things like that. But the complexity of the typical vehicles on the road today is absolutely mind-boggling. And he was talking about how that complexity is coming in the way of Ford being able to innovate and to compete with companies such as Tesla, which from the very beginning of their life has taken a very different path. Tesla, really, when you think about it, is not really in the car business. When you think of a Tesla car, it really is a computer with metal sheet wrapped around it that happens to take you from places to places. It is a connected computer, and it's also a very highly vertically integrated computer. In contrast to the 130 or 150 modules in a typical Ford or GM car, a Tesla car really has a couple of modules. Really, there's two modules. One, you have the central modules that integrates all the core and critical functions of the vehicle, such as operating the vehicles, running the vehicles, and all the safety and observability capabilities that are vertically integrated into one module. There's obviously physically distributed systems, but they all integrate with a single module, single brain. And then the second module is an AI module and a data module that observes the core module, learns from it, gathers data, analyzes data, and in some cases push back actions back into the core module, but very much operates as a separate brain. And that kind of two module design has allowed Tesla to iterate extremely fast and to create new models and improve on these models at a very, very rapid pace. Whereas when Ford wants to create a new capability that involves more than one module, they have to coordinate with a number of external vendors, different company cultures, different technology stack, millions and millions of lines of code that in many cases Ford does not even have access or visibility into. So very different approaches, but at the end of the day, an example where complexity kills agility. So I think it's a good point in the presentation now to maybe do a 5-minute break and see if we have reactions, examples, comments maybe. And so Morgan, I don't know if you saw anything in the chat, or if anybody wants to raise their hand and maybe ask questions directly.
Yeah, I don't see any questions that have been in the chat yet, but now is a good time if anyone has questions to type into the chat so we can see it. There was a raised hand earlier, but I'm
There was
not
a hand
sure.
earlier, but it went down.
I think they went down. Yeah, okay. Let's see. There's a message coming in. Okay, here's a question from Eric. How would you use AI in conjunction with MSP to develop, enhance, and maintain plans?
Hold that thought. I have a couple of slides on this very question in the next section, but that is a fantastic question. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Any other questions out there at the moment? I'm glad the chat, I can see it's working, so I know everyone has access.
We'll definitely pause at the end and do a kind of a general Q&A at the end of this. So, keep thinking about questions if you have any. All right, so to Eric's question, so impact of AI and how it's kind of changing kind of the way the way we work, but sometimes in more subtle ways than we might think. So when I was thinking about how AI is transforming the project lifecycle, I kind of categorized AI because it can be a big nebulous and sometimes easily misunderstood area, and it is a buzzword, and it is synonymous to many different things. Artificial intelligence is maybe overused today, so I try to create a little bit of a taxonomy, like how does AI show up today for someone on the ground, someone like me or a project manager who's managing projects, and how does AI kind of show up? So to me, there's kind of three areas. The first one is AI is increasingly present in the systems that surround us, the system that power the things we sometimes take for granted. I'm currently connected through Wi-Fi and an internet provider, and there's probably been a couple of outages, micro outages, since I started this conversation 37 minutes ago, but no one noticed because I'm sure they have some ongoing analysis of packets and traffic disruptions. And I'm pretty certain, because I've had conversations with these companies in the past, that they have things like predictive analytics on what might happen because of existing situations, and in many cases, self-healing of these systems, right? But we increasingly rely on intelligent systems. And connectivity is an example, but ERP systems and all the panoply of systems that power a typical enterprise are increasingly augmented by AI through ongoing data analytics, automated data collection, real-time analysis, the ability now to predict issues before they arise, and in many cases now to react proactively to these issues so that they don't happen in the first place, because the signals were leading to the expectation of failure, and that failure was averted by automation and proactive measure. So this is one of the ways that we don't necessarily experience AI, but where AI has been seeping into the fabric of the systems we depend on and create a more predictive and hopefully a more stable environment, but also one where the productivity and the reliability of the system that we all depend on as knowledge workers, as we like to call it back in the days, that experience is now augmented and improved through intelligent systems. The second one is a little bit more specific to the role and maybe the discipline. The tools we use are increasingly becoming intelligent. It's now possible to analyze, detect patterns, and make decisions based on the analysis of these patterns from amount of data that were until recently absolutely unapproachable. The volume of data that we create on a daily basis is so great that without intelligent systems, machine learning based models, AI tools, it would be impossible to detect and to make sense out of these patterns. So we see an increased amount of tools that analyze data sets to improve outcomes and efficiency, reduce just the manual toil. I mean, how many times have we done postmortems to try and find the needle in a haystack of signals to explain why a project went south or why something failed, and only to realize that we are limited by just the amount of data that us humans can manually go through and make sense out of. And so the tools we have for data analytics are now making these things possible. And they're not only making them possible, they're enabling these insights to be pushed to us, not just easier to find once we decide to go look for them. And that's actually a critical point. There's the new crop of modern AI-based and machine learning-based systems are now increasingly capable of detecting, curating, and presenting to us users the signals and the analysis that we will find important and interesting. We don't have to go look for them. And that's what you find in these intelligent systems. And as a result, it helps increase the productivity and the communication of all of us as we work on projects and execution. It allows us to kind of abstract ourselves from the background noise and to really focus on what we do best. And so that's been one of the things that I've seen kind of emerge most predominantly recently. To answer the question maybe a little bit more, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I don't remember, but I was kind of thinking how it was interesting that we had in project and project server access to so much data on behalf of the customer, and yet did so little to try and predict the future a little bit more accurately. When you think about it, project management is, in the essence of the discipline, the art of trying to predict the future. It's, of course, about planning and creating structure and facilitating execution to deliver products. But at the end of the day, it's really about trying to predict the future. When will the product be done, or when will that milestone be achieved? When will that happen? What is the risk for this particular initiative, et cetera, et cetera. So it is the art of trying to predict the future. And we sometimes, and what was interesting is I would observe that for the most part, project managers would try and predict the future based from a theoretical and sometimes idealistic view of the past, whereas we had access to data for projects that had been successful and projects that had not been successful. And we didn't really do much with that data other than giving you access to that postmortem data set. But project data goes beyond project tools. The systems of record that we use, that project managers use, they're, the Asanas, the project servers, the Primaveras of the world, they're just actually a very small subset of the type of data that goes around managing a project. Most projects are managed by emails and Slack channels and Teams conversations and meeting discussions between humans and other forms of communication. And for sure, we don't do much, if anything, with those types of data. These are left into their tools. They're captive to the tools that facilitate that communication. It's Outlook, it's Teams, it's Slack. And for quite certain, we don't really go back to these, or very rarely, to analyze how a project might have gone south or why something failed to pan out. And increasingly, the tools, the modern crop of tools, the AI-based tools, are going beyond the boundaries of the strict definition of a project management tool like Microsoft Project. Increasingly, the tools are going beyond that and incorporating data sources that are not traditionally viewed as project management tools, but contain all these signals that help understand and, more importantly, help predict how the next similar project might pan out based on all of those signals that, for the most part, were left unanalyzed and underutilized. And then finally, the third area is, we're working increasingly on intelligent products, where AI is not just part of the panoply of tools that was used to build these products, but AI is part of the experience that the product exposes. We've all used the new AI functionalities on our phones. It's probably this, I'm still carrying the same phone I had a couple of years ago, but now I can speak to it and ask, questions, and it seems to be fairly smart in answering these questions, and these capabilities came up over time. That's an example of an intelligent functionality that crept into a product that I've been carrying around for some time. So we increasingly build intelligence. We see it in vehicles, in our cars, with AV or the automated vehicles. And so it's an increasing expectation that the products we experience, they're not just receiving firmware updates, which kind of goes into the previous category I was talking about, where product lifecycle is now evolving and never really ending. That's a given nowadays, but it's now expected that products will increasingly learn from the usage we make, but not the usage that the global user base is making, the usage that you, the user is making of that version of the product, that instance of the product, it's increasingly expected that these products will understand your usage pattern and in a very unique and personalized manner react and deliver a differentiated experience based on your interaction with the product. So the emergence of intelligent product, customizable product, personalizable product is now kind of the norm, or at least the expectation, right? So these whole categories are affecting all of us in different ways, and the role of a project manager has to really kind of adapt, particularly in the second and third category, because the first one is kind of the ambient tools we use, but in the second category and the third categories, it is changing the way project management as a discipline has to evolve. And if I apply that to a process that I'm familiar with as a software engineer, but also very passionate about, tools like GitHub. If I apply the previous, iterative and lifecycle model that I used earlier, and I augment that with AI, you can look at how GitHub today is helping the average software engineer be 55% more efficient at writing code. That's a figure I actually lifted from the Copilot literature, but it's anywhere in that area by virtue of allowing software engineers to no longer spend tons of time on the menial aspect of software engineering and instead focus on what they do best, which is building unique logic or doing interesting, building interesting features. 70% less time or stress felt by the software engineers because they have the ability to focus on what they do best. Increase in productivity and efficiency. You have tools like Datadog or Catalan that are helping build automated AI-driven test cases and increase test coverage in a highly automated way, which again increases the certainty or at least the confidence around product quality and decreases the amount of manual effort that's involved in building tests and running tests and automation, right? So the very process of software engineering itself is being augmented by AI tools as we speak and is revolutionizing the world of software engineers. I mean, I used to write code for a living back in the mid 90s, and the world that as a software engineer people live in today could not be more different than the world I did live in back in the mid 90s. So yeah, I mean, how does AI impact your role as a project manager? How is that already maybe started? And how have you been able to embrace? But also, what challenges have you maybe run into? Just a question I'd like to kind of plant in your head as we kind of head to the Q&A part of the conversation. So, we're notoriously bad as humans in predicting the future. So I'm going to make a few predictions and I'm very likely going to be wrong, but they're probably in the realm of possibility. One prediction I have is that, with project management being so complex as a discipline, it's a high cost of entry. It's typically based on either imperfect or outdated understanding of the past. And because data is so hard to plow through, I predict, as I was kind of discussing earlier, that increasingly we're going to see project management incorporate the ability to analyze not only data, signals and data sets that is easily found and currently is held into the classic systems of records for project management, such as Microsoft Project and Project Server, but increasingly we'll be incorporating external data sets that are part of the broader project management activities, including natural language conversations between humans like we're having today, or discussions on Slack and Jira and so on. Increasingly, this broader metadata around the project data will be included and incorporated in project management tools to help manage, predict, and be more effective at running projects in the future. Now, data is challenging, especially unstructured data. Being able to analyze highly structured data, such as a project plan or the historical data from project execution, That's fairly easy, and we've been doing that for decades now. But analyzing unstructured data, such as meeting notes or discussions, and to try and infer project risks or issues from these human discussions is quite difficult today. And with technologies like LLMs and other large language model based systems, it's increasingly easy or easier to derive structured data and data signals out of these unstructured interactions that we all have as humans. And for the most part, that type of interactions continues to represent the majority of the time that is spent managing projects. It's the meetings you sit in, it's the conversations you have in the hallways, it's the chats and the emails that you write to keep things moving. Increasingly, we see tools being able to derive structured data out of this. I actually happen to work on a startup that is doing just that. And we're increasingly looking at unstructured data and connecting it with structured systems of record to augment the view of project management and to hopefully deliver better capabilities to people who are managing projects in a complex environment. And then finally, quality is super difficult to measure and improve. The metrics are only as good as, or the outcomes are only as good as the metrics that you collect, and the ability to analyze these metrics, especially with the exponential increase of data that seems to be available. It really is like trying to find a needle in a haystack, and that is increasingly difficult. So this one is more of a safe bet because it's already happening. But large AI systems and machine learning models are now being used increasingly to focus on the signal and remove the noise and really look for patterns that can be applied as opposed to being drowned in the noise that surrounds us. All right, so potential challenges. I mean, it's not all good. It's not all rosy in the AI world. AI brings absolutely complex change management to any team. You have to rethink software delivery completely from the ground up. Even as teams have been fairly successful in moving from the linear waterfall model to iterative agile model, AI is adding another dimension. It's almost like we went from a 2D world to a 3D world with agile, and now we're evolving and going towards a more of a 4D, like a fourth dimension world, with AI being that new dimension that's thrown into the mix. So training, understanding, keeping up with the trends is complex and requires an ongoing change management process for any team and any project manager out there. The other one is the quality of outcomes can vary a lot, and garbage in, garbage out. As you and us and all of us increasingly rely on AI and machine learning models, the quality of these models is only as good as the data that was used to train them. And the quality of data is becoming an absolutely critical aspect of the AI, of any AI-driven processes. And because AI can be very obscure, sometimes AI works in mysterious ways, trusting the outcome of ML and AI models can be dangerous if the inputs and the data that was used to feed them is not fully understood or high quality. So that's one of the key challenges today. And then finally, and I touched on that, keeping up with AI is literally an always on process. Every week, a new model comes out. Every week, the previous week's model is proven incomplete and has to be, updated. And so it's a constant race to be relevant, to stay on top, and to stay updated. But I'm an optimist, and I think the benefits dramatically outweigh those risks. These are just challenges we have to be absolutely aware of. So I've captured, the key points in the discussion here, and I want to open up the last 5 minutes for maybe some questions and reactions to what I talked about in the last 55 minutes.
Great, thank you. We do have a few questions. So let me see if I can find one that we can fit into the time here. Um, let's start with this one because it is actually a question. Do you imagine an AI environment that can or will integrate open source LLMs along with proprietary LLMs?
Yes, absolutely. I think we're seeing that actually play out today. The the world of AI LLMs today is kind of segmented between the players that have gone pretty closed source, and ironically, one of them is OpenAI, and the players that have essentially committed to delivering their models in an open way. And I think Llama is a pretty good example of that. But there's a ton of really good open source models. In fact, in the startup I was talking about that I'm leading, we're playing with a number of open source models, and we're thinking of self-hosting some of these models in our own cloud environment and no longer go against public APIs. We currently use OpenAI APIs, but we're actually looking at some of our product areas being built with self-hosted open models. And they used to be okay. Some of these models are starting to be phenomenally good. So I think it's definitely trending in that direction. And then the other thing that I would say is even for closed models, such as OpenAI, what we're seeing is companies like Microsoft are starting to offer siloed or personal versions or enterprise version of these models into your Azure enterprise space, for instance, in the case of Microsoft, that guarantees that the training, the data that flows through to train and maybe augment these models will stay within the context and the confine of your enterprise subscription. So even though some of these models are not open, by definition of what open source is, companies like Microsoft, and I'm sure others will follow suit, are increasingly offering these models in a guaranteed, secure, and compliant space. So the fears and concerns, which are fairly grounded around AI, are starting to be absolutely top of mind for these companies, and we're going to see the kind of this two-pronged approach. Open models are getting better, and you can host them increasingly yourself in your own subscriptions or even your own machines. And companies like Microsoft are starting to offer capabilities that guarantee the privacy of your data.
Okay, thank you. I think we just have maybe time for just one more quick one. It's actually a follow-up from Eric's initial question that you just covered in the end of the presentation. But he said to add to this question, how can AI be used for user acceptance and project team use with MSP?
Yeah, I think because LLMs are getting so good now at understanding intent, and when people write, talk, or exchange conversations, understanding sometimes the sentiment, the intent, the goal that they try to achieve, we can now process massive amount of customer feedback and use LLMs to distill that feedback into clear kind of action items or clear intent, or distill it into patterns of requests and expectations. And I remember back when we were doing in the early 2000s, we would do customer showcase and customer labs where we would bring customers, or we would open up forums for customer feedback. We would literally have to have humans seep through thousands of pages of verbal feedback to try and distill it into, all right, these are the 5 features we need to do for the next version. I mean, that can now be done in a matter of seconds with LLMs, and a pretty high level of reliability. But more importantly, it can be done real time. It no longer has to be the thing we do every 3 or 6 months. It can be done in a real time basis by just monitoring chat rooms and forums such as MPUG and other source of data. So I think that's no longer, you know, science fiction. It's happening today, and increasingly product teams are using those capabilities to understand the product better and to react to their customer base in near real time by just reading what people are talking about.
Great, thank you. Thanks for those questions and for your responses, Ludo. Thank you for presenting today. We are going to go ahead and wrap this up. I imagine there's more to talk about, so we can hopefully get another event scheduled with you soon and continue this conversation. Is there anything else there you go, perfect. You need to wrap up there. Ludo's contact information is on here on your screen right now. And do you want to say anything about how people can reach you?
Yeah, feel free to reach out. I'll be happy to hear from anyone who's interested in, you know, follow-ups and, you know, connect with me on LinkedIn. And, you know, thank you for your time today. I hope this was helpful, and, you know, good luck in navigating the exciting world of project management in this new era.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, we need to share the claim code for today. So I'm going to bring that up on your screen. Sorry, I'm navigating Zoom here. Give me one moment. There it is. All right, today's PDU code is MPUG, capital letter MPUG 091824. Again, capital MPUG 091824. Oops, I forgot to change the title on that slide. Today's title is not that, but the code is correct. MPUG 01824. All right. And I will come back over here just to say thanks and goodbye to everyone. This session was recorded. It will be available on MPUG's website under training and lessons within 24 hours, so you can revisit this. And you can also take a look at all of our other lessons up there as well. And I hope to see you all in the discussion forum, which you're also invited to and already have access to as MPUG members. The last things I'm seeing in the chat, Ludo, are just thank you and great session. So we appreciate you.
Appreciate it.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording and say goodbye here. Enjoy your day, everyone. Hope to see you again soon. Take care. I'm going to stop the recording and then I'll display the code again.